I'm Joe Sanak, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. I am so glad that you are here today with me. We're going to be talking all about valuing your private practice and potentially selling it. And this is a question I get so often because a lot of you are rocking out private practice and you're getting offers from companies or individuals to buy your private practice. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We are also doing this as a YouTube video. So those of you watching this video in YouTube land, welcome. Glad you're here as well. A lot of companies have been making offers to people that are in our communities. And this is a question I just keep getting over and over. And I wanted to make sure that I organized my thoughts, I thought through it, and shared some stories from my own experience and from people that I've consulted with on how to do that. So if you need some handholding with this, reach out to me. I'm happy to help. We do consulting with people and we actually help negotiate as well. And we do that a little bit differently when we do consulting. We do it as a percentage of the final sale so that we have a vested interest in making sure that you make as much money as possible. We've helped to negotiate 7-figure deals for people, which is pretty dang amazing when you're just paying a percentage instead of an hourly for your consulting. All right. So let's just start with my story. I started mental wellness counseling. It was back in 2006. I filed the LLC paperwork, the PLLC paperwork, changed the name to mental wellness counseling from Sanak Counseling, super original, my last name, PLLC, to mental wellness counseling. So in Michigan, just had to do a DBA for that PLLC. And so I had mentalwellnesscounseling.com. Got it going. And then I remember when I was supervising this guy, Steve, and Steve, he worked at an addiction center. He had that full-time job and he was working on getting his full licensure here in Michigan. And I was a supervisor and he said, I really want to have just some side gig money. I want to pay off student loans. He was a single dad with 2 teen boys and was raising them on his own. He's like, I want to make some extra money. And having a group practice was not on my radar at all. I was subleasing my office from another therapist. And so I had to kind of negotiate those terms and, eventually had, Steve as a 1099. He left his full-time job. I left my full-time job. And before you knew it, I had a 6-person private pay, private practice. And it kept growing. We got up to 13 people. And, we have other people that, are consultants like Ash. And we have now Nicole Ball, who have much larger practices than that. But, that was a good size for me for what I wanted to do. And I remember my lease was going to be up in the summer of 2019. And I was thinking about what I wanted to do. And I was like, do I want to keep doing this? Because I was only seeing 1 or 2 clients a week. And all the rest was just passive income. Most of my time at that point was put into practice the practice. I was doing the podcast and consulting, and I loved that so much more than doing the therapy. I just really felt like I found what I enjoy doing. And it was this internal thing where in early 2019, I think it was like mid-January, I'm like, oh my gosh, this lease is going to be up. Do I sign another lease for 5 years? And at that time, things were really competitive in the business space. This was right before the pandemic, a year before. So, you had to really make that decision ahead of time. And do I want that space? Do I want to keep that space? Do I want to stay right downtown in beautiful downtown Traverse City with a view of the bay? Do I want to move? There's even part of me that's like, do I want to just close up and just say, I'm just done running this business? But that felt really dumb because, it really took only about half an hour a week to run this thing. What if I had a clinical director or operations director where I was pretty much like a passive owner? That was something I was thinking through. And then Nicole, one of my clinicians, came to me and said, so what's going to happen in July? So she is a professor in addition to having been a therapist with me. And, she was planning ahead. She was looking at, she needed to start getting her schedule in for the summer and the fall and, all those things. Academic calendars are way ahead of most other people's calendars. And, it really got me thinking, what am I doing here? I really don't like running the practice anymore, even though it didn't take much. I really didn't want the liability of, when people leave and hiring and do I want to train an operations person? I enjoyed doing that with my consulting clients, but to do it myself, I just really didn't see myself doing that. And I said to her, I've got a lot of options. I'm not 100% sure what I want to do in July. I mean, maybe get another office, maybe kind of keep things going. I'd be open to selling it. And she said, you'd be open to selling it? And I said, yeah, I mean, if the right person, I want to make sure we kind of maintain what mental wellness counseling has become, and want to make sure that we kind of respect what all of you have done, and, want to just do it right. And she was like, well, I'd be interested in at least having that conversation. So we set a date for a couple weeks later. And I ran some numbers and, really went through the process where I talked with my attorney, because practice up till that point, because of my attorney has said the consulting and coaching and all that could run through mental wellness counseling as a legal entity. So I didn't have to have two LLCs. And as we talked, that made it really messy, where, to say, well, what money came in through the practice, which money came in through practice the practice. So luckily, I had used PayPal for almost all of the purchases for practice the practice. And I had used Square for almost all of the purchases of mental wellness counseling. And so it was pretty easy to figure out the financial side. And we also, I had client data and stuff like that. But, had we not, that's really something I'd recommend, a few years out from selling, making sure if you do have other income coming through, it just makes it a lot easier and cleaner if you can just kind of look at that information separate. So we looked at that. We talked through if I were to sell, should I kind of do almost like a, what's that called when you kind of rent to own kind of thing, where she just pays me a monthly amount for 5 years. And he really said, if she can't get a loan for this business, then that means either her credit is really bad or the bank thinks your business isn't a good investment. And she's most likely not going to repay it. And so she really should get a loan, he had recommended. And then he said she should buy the full PLLC and we should start a new one for practice the practice, which we ended up doing. He said then, basically by selling that entire LLC, then I no longer had ownership. I no longer had as much of that liability, that it all was turned over. And she actually ended up filing a new LLC, and I gave up the website, the name, all of that. And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but just telling you the whole story of it. And then we'll talk about how we valued it and how the sale ended up going. So, really, like by closing Sandlot Counseling PLLC, and then transferring all the books over to a new LLC, but on the public image side, nothing changed. It just looked like the same business, but it reduced her liability in taking on the business, reduced my liability by not keeping the business open and having any assets in that business. I got my payout and then, left. So let's talk about the actual valuing of a business. I'm going to do kind of the quick and dirty version, and then I'm going to dig in a little bit. So usually you're going to look at 3 to 5 years of the net income outside of the owner that's leaving. And so, so maybe your business made $100,000, but then between paying the clinicians and the amount that you brought in and, all the things that it costs to run a business, maybe you only made $20,000 a year. Maybe you were taking home quite a bit more because you were doing clinical work, but if you're no longer going to work for that business, that really shouldn't be included. So if it's $20,000 per year, and then we look at that over the last 3 to 5 years, that's a starting point for, $20K times 5 years. It's about $100K value in what that business is. And then we want to just look at some of the tangible and intangible assets. So how much would it cost for a website rebuild to get the SEO at that level? How much would it cost to get that level of marketing, professional photos, all that infrastructure, the operations, the staff hiring, the reputation? Those are all things that you then look at, and then you say, okay, this business is worth $150K. And then, that person says like, yeah, that's reasonable. And hopefully they get a loan for that full amount or they can pay out of pocket. But yeah, like I said earlier, you don't necessarily want to have kind of a rent to own type of approach to it typically. So that's the really quick and dirty version of figuring out how much your counseling private practice is worth. But I want to really kind of go through some checklist items to really look at both the tangible and the intangible aspects of a business. And I kind of put together 15 different ways or things to think about when you're valuing your counseling private practice. The first category is really the financial assessment. So you're going to gather the financial statements for yourself. And this would be true if you're looking at buying one as well. And, I always say at the end of the show, like, I am not a financial planner. All those things. If you need a professional, you should hire one. All that stuff is applicable here. Like, do your own research. Don't just ever just take my word for it. Like, make sure that you really think through it. So you're going to first gather financial statements. You want to collect profit and loss statements, balance sheet, cash flow statements for the past 3 to 5 years to really have a good picture of what are those rhythms? What are the ups and downs, so that that buyer has a really good idea. And usually you'll have them sign a NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, if they wanted to look through all of that. Like, I just had a friend who was looking at purchasing just like a really boring business, just like a HVAC company. And he had to sign like an NDA and all these other things. And you'll look at those statements in a secure place. Like, he couldn't download them. They didn't email them to him. It's like, he had to go look at it on their computers. So that may be what you do. They may want their attorney or their accountant to look through some of that. So it may be done digitally. So you're gathering those financial statements together. You're going to then calculate the revenue. So determining the average annual revenue generated by that practice over that specific period of time. And then you're going to assess those expenses. Like, look at, a lot of times, people have had expenses in a business that have kept the overall cash flow low for, say, tax reasons or other reasons, or accountants do all sorts of stuff to legally pay fewer taxes. So analyzing all those that are the fixed and the variable expenses. So fixed meaning it's always the same price. So that might be rent. It could be that your website is a specific amount. And then there's variable expenses, such as, how much you pay clinicians. Sometimes that's based on their client load. So if they're seeing fewer clients, then you're paying less. Then you're going to look at the profit margin. So you want to calculate the profit margin by dividing the net profit by the total revenue and express that as a percentage. And so, like, what is that percentage? So again, that's calculating the profit margin is by dividing the net profit, so the amount after the expenses, by the total profit and having that as a percentage. So if you make $100,000 and that net profit, maybe is 40,000, it's 40%. So to kind of understand that, then you want to really start to research a little bit more regarding the multipliers. So I would say what's standard in the counseling world is typically 5 years of revenue, because revenue typically is increasing and growing. It's not as risky as other businesses. Therapy is a pretty consistent business in most markets, and especially for an established practice if they've been around for 5 years. But we need to look at, does this year equate to 5 years ago? Because oftentimes what we'll see from those past 5 years, and you want to agree with or try to negotiate and agree with how you're coming to these terms with your potential buyer, to say, yeah, sure, 3 years ago, we only made half as much, but we're on a trajectory where we've shown that every year we've grown by 20 to 50%, which means in 5 years, based on that projection, it should be at this. We're going to do a multiplier of this year's net revenue instead of the last 5 years. So that's where you're talking through how you get to that valuation. So that's kind of the first few steps. Now, the next steps you want to look at is your client base and the operations. So your client base and your operations, you've got your client list. So that's a list of active clients, demographics, their client retention rate, long-term contracts, anything like that. So you may be on EAPs. You might have different things that are with insurances. I was private pay, so it was very easy to switch our LLC over. Whereas if we had a whole bunch of contracts that were specific to us having a W-9 and contracts with the company, we wouldn't have closed down one and then reopened another. We would have obviously kept that LLC going. But looking at what's the value of those long-term contracts? What's the value of already being paneled and already from day one being able to cash flow? I want to look at current kind of and historical and future appointment bookings. So, on average, if we're looking at how many intakes are coming in, looking at that appointment scheduling, how frequently are people coming in, the occupancy rate of your office, gauging how well that practice is utilized. Are you 90% full? Is that predictable? If we look back at July, when oftentimes we see a summer slump, is that true then? So do we base it on September, which we know is often a busier month for therapy, or do we base it on July, or do we look at it kind of annually? Having those numbers in a good EHR like Therapy Notes or other EHRs will help you kind of pull some of that data together. Because one thing that a buyer is going to want to do is they're going to want to say, okay, so you do really short-term therapy. People come 3 times and then they're done. That means if someone's paying $200 a session, the lifetime value of most of your clients is only $600. Or it may be, wow, your average client comes, for 2.5 years, averaging, coming every 10 days. And here's what that rate ends up being. So being able to allow that person to run those numbers and see the value of what you've built. And then also looking at your staff assessment. So, evaluating the qualifications, experience, roles of therapists, admin staff. This is where the value of a company goes up significantly if they're W-2 employees compared to if you have a bunch of 1099 contractors. So I had always done 1099 contractors. I had always done private pay. In retrospect, I wasn't thinking through what someone would buy if I sold my practice. Selling the practice was never on my radar when I was building the practice. But if you have a bunch of employees that you have contracts with that are highly qualified, I mean, in this competitive employment environment, like that's super valuable. And if you have good compensation plans that people, you have a good hierarchy where you aren't needed, and you have a clinical supervisor, you've got operational people, you've got admin staff. That's going to be a lot more turnkey for somebody than starting their own practice, or if they're looking to acquire multiple practices in your state. All right. So yes, we wanted to look at that client base and operations. The next area we want to look at is location and the facility. So if you own the building, like of course that's valuable, to just like get an assessment of what that building's worth. Are they buying a whole building? It's sort of like a separate real estate deal, separate from the purchase of the practice. And I'd say it's worth working with a real estate professional to decide if that's included in the purchase of the practice. But even just the location value of, is there a rental agreement? Is there for a certain period of time where you've locked in a really good location that's highly sought after, one that maybe has an impact on the demand and accessibility for your clients? Like that has value that you are potentially in like a high traffic area. Also, doing a facility assessment, like looking at the condition, the aesthetics of the office, including the waiting room, the therapy rooms. Are you going to be including furniture in the sale? And so, is this coming fully furnished when someone purchases it? If so, like, do we look at the replacement cost? Do we look at the original purchase cost? Is artwork and file cabinets and computers, are those all included in the sale or not? And sometimes it's helpful to itemize how you got to your final number when you're looking at the sale of it and what all is included in that. All right. Next, we want to look at some of those intangible factors. So this is the part that it's a little bit harder to value, but we want to look at your reputation and your brand. So looking at in your community and online, where are there connections and referrals? So for me, every single Tuesday, I was on local radio talking about therapeutic issues. And when Nicole was purchasing the business, she already had come, but it was a smooth handoff to say, yeah, why don't you come on the Crystal Frost show every Tuesday? You're the new owner. Mental wellness counseling is continuing. I'm just, taking my check and leaving. Looking at, do you have client reviews on Google or Yelp? I know most of our ethics say that we're not supposed to ask for them, but those may be out there. And so Nicole got, the Google reviews. She got all of that as part of it. What referral sources do we have, and will that handoff, go well? If you have great connections, with 5 or 10 doctors and massage therapists and yoga teachers, and they're each sending one client a month, that's 10 clients a month that are coming in. There's value there beyond just the financial net. And that overall brand recognition. Have you done a good job being known in your community as one of the best counseling practices? We ranked number one for almost every counseling search term. Once in a while, Psychology Today would beat mental wellness counseling. But at the time, nobody was really doing any SEO in our area. And so mental wellness counseling, we could just knock it out of the park by just doing a handful of blog posts that were really strategic. Also, are there intangible factors like specializations, like evaluating any specialized therapies you offer? Is EMDR, for example, not really offered in your area and you have 3 EMDR therapists? Like, that's an intangible value if you have contracts with those 1099s or if you have contracts with those W-2s that differentiates your business from competitors. We also want to look at just some of those other relationships, not even direct referral sources, like looking at the quality of those referral sources, but also medical professionals, community stakeholders. Have you as an owner been on a number of boards locally? Like, do you have a reputation, but does your business also have that reputation as well? Now, there's a couple more factors that I would say are kind of bonus factors to just make sure that you're looking at. Looking at the legal and the regulatory factors with licensing and compliance. You want to make sure that your practice is compliant with all of your relevant state and local regulations for operating a practice. So some states, for example, require that the owner of a counseling practice be licensed. A lot of states, want that. They don't want unlicensed people being the owners, even if they're not practicing. So you don't want to dig into these things and have a bunch of attorneys and accountants looking at your stuff only to find out you're out of compliance and there's things that have to be reported, or there's things that are unethical, or really bad ways of doing things. So you want to make sure that you've got everything cleaned up, that there's no pending lawsuits, that there's no things like that are going on, that your therapists don't have any kind of charges against them, just some of those kinds of things that you want to think through. And then one of the last things is to really look at those market trends as part of it. So researching the current and projected trends in the counseling industry that could impact the value and the growth of it. Really valuing a counseling practice can be really complex. There's quantitative and qualitative considerations, things to think through in regards to like how it feels. So your brand is like how it feels versus the hard numbers. And in general, I would say give yourself at least 20% more than what you value it at to give yourself a bunch of wiggle room. You may even want to go as a multiplier of 1.5. So you have a lot of wiggle room to land where hopefully you really want to. And it may make sense to consult with a business appraiser, a financial advisor, industry experts that can give different insights. Because your area, maybe some counseling practices have sold, maybe they haven't sold, but it's really important to just make sure that you put in that due diligence, you think through it, you value it, and then you want to have a good relationship with the person that buys your practice, hopefully. Nicole, she actually is now a consultant with Practice the Practice. She has 3 locations. I don't know how many therapists she's up to. They switched to take insurance. She has made mental wellness counseling her own and has really done an amazing and impressive job. And now she's a consultant with Practice the Practice, where she helps other people to be able to grow a practice either that they bought or that they already have. I'm doing consulting with people that are selling their practices. There's lots of different things that you can do. And to me, maintaining that relationship, if at all possible, with that person, even if you're negotiating and have, some tough disagreements, to land on the other side and be like, this is something that I created and I'm choosing to sell at this point, and I should be rewarded for that and get a good payout for it as well. That is a lot for us to cover. Holy cow. There was a lot there. Next week, we are kicking off Level Up Week. I know that we've been talking a ton about it on the podcast, but I really don't want you to miss it. I want you to go sign up for at least one webinar. You'll get the recordings. They'll be available for a week afterwards for those raw recordings. We'll be passing them on to you. And then our members, they get full access as bonuses. Our members end up getting access to all of the Killing It Camp recordings, all of the Level Up recordings from March, and then also all of the ones from September. So you're going to get access to that as well if you're in one of our membership communities, which our memberships open during Level Up Week, which make sure you sign up for a membership over at practicethepractice.com/membership so that you can just level up in some crazy awesome ways. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. And those of you on YouTube, thanks for watching this. I hope you took a ton of notes. And thank you so much. I will see you all in Level Up Week. Again, you can register at practiceofthepractice.com/level up. Thanks.